Bad news, guys. Now, just in case you haven't noticed, I'm pretty sure you have noticed, but the government has basically been running our country with debt. Dread it, run from it. The bust comes all the same. I mean, we just can't just keep racking up debt without a plan here, right, guys? Just hear how one analyst puts it.
There's a problem, right? We're spending more money than we bring in, and the debt's increasing, and the cost of servicing that debt's going higher. It doesn't take, a rocket scientist or a Harvard MBA to say that's probably not sustainable.
Now, you often hear the word leverage when it comes to the economy and finance, but really, in the context of economics, it's mostly just meaning debt. Now, during the boom phase, you'll see debt all over the place. Everybody's taking loans out, they're spending like there's no tomorrow. It feels great, like prosperity is in the air. But that's going to have to end at some point. So after all that spending frenzy, we hit this deleveraging phase where people just start paying off their debts, the spending slows down, and the economy just takes a nosedive. And guess what, guys? That may come sooner rather than later when it comes to the economy. I mean, just look at this. The U.S. consumer credit card debt exceeds $1 trillion now. These are the kind of records that we don't want to be setting. Now, just to kind of point out, we're approaching levels that we've seen during the Great Recession and during the onset of the pandemic. And this is before the impact of federal student loan repayments, which are set to resume in October. Consumer debt shot up by a whopping $17.9 billion from May to June. So we're definitely starting to feel the credit crunch caused by those federal rate hikes. People are taking on more outstanding credit, especially for stuff like mortgages and car loans. Trying to flex on your neighbor at the stoplight. It's crazy, guys. The numbers even beat expectations, which, by the way, were only at $13 billion, and it's nearly double the increase from the previous month, which was $9.4 billion. But even though we saw a big jump in the overall debt, there was a slight dip of 0.6% in the revolving credit, which includes things like credit cards, lines of credit, HELOCs, that kind of thing. But economists are saying that if we see another drop in the July numbers, it might mean some consumers are actually hitting their credit limits. And if that happens, we'll be in for a slowdown in spending during the second half of the year. And like I said earlier, despite the month-over-month decline in revolving credit card debt weighing on the United States consumers, it's at an all-time high of more than $1 trillion. Now, even after steadily rising over the last decade, credit card debt levels started easing up in March of 2020 when the government started sending out stimulus checks to help households weather the C-19 pandemic. They fell by more than $100 billion the following year, dropping to $736 billion in April of 2021. But then they started rising again sharply during the booming recovery and now above their pre-pandemic trend. Total credit card debt sitting at about 11.6% higher than it was a year ago. And this is actually down from a recent high of 18.4% in September of 2022. Now, as a share of disposable income, debt service payments, they're about where they were before the pandemic, hitting 5.7% in the first quarter of the year. Basically, credit card interest rates, along with mortgage rates and other types of financing that rely on charging interest, they've pretty much been skyrocketing as the Federal Reserve has been raising the rate at which banks can lend money to each other. Now, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but the average commercial bank interest rate on credit card plans is now above 20%, which is up from the 14.5% in February of last year, before the Federal Reserve started slowing the economy with those rate hikes. That's the highest level on record for a payment method that's traditionally one of the most expensive ways for consumers to purchase goods and services. GDP and all that's doing better, but we're really not sure if it's doing anything meaningful nor improving things for workers and consumers. Now, a recent poll by Lending Club found that a majority of Americans say that they're living paycheck to paycheck. Specifically in May of 2023, when the poll was taken, 57% of consumers live paycheck to paycheck. More than 72% of people making less than $50,000 a year live paycheck to paycheck. Meanwhile, 60.9% of people making between $50,000 and $100,000 annually live that way. And the Census Bureau data shows that 85.4 million Americans use credit cards to pay their expenses in the last 7 days. For most people, credit card use has been going up recently for regular expenses, including food and laundry. What about you guys? Remember, you don't have to go down with the ship. There are still options, and very good options, by the way. Now, if you own a home, make sure your home is protected. Get your free home warranty quote. There's a link in the description down below. Now, one thing's for sure, it pays to be updated during these uncertain times. And so this is why I highly recommend subscribing to the channel and also tapping that notification bell. That way you don't miss out on any of my important financial news and updates for you guys. And hey, I totally wouldn't mind if you guys hit that like button. Always appreciate that. But back then, the economy was run on gold, and people's paper paper notes were actually backed by gold deposits in the bank. Y'all remember that? I sure don't because I wasn't there, but I read about it. But back then, the bank gets a bit too excited about lending money and realizes that they can do it without losing their purchasing power. So more lending happens and the economy grows like never before. But like any good thing, this boom also leads to a deleveraging phase, either with too much inflation or deflation. Now, if we go ahead and fast forward to today, you got central banks like the Federal Reserve in the mix, and they can mess with the boom bust cycle by adjusting interest rates. Lowering interest rates encourages borrowing and spending, making it cheaper for businesses and for individuals to take out loans for investments, for purchases, and other economic activities. Now, this increase in borrowing and spending, it boosts economic growth, leading to a period of expansion and prosperity. However, as the economy grows and inflation starts to rise, the Federal Reserve may respond by raising interest rates to control inflation. Higher interest rates makes borrowing more expensive, leading to reduced consumer spending and business investments. The tighter credit conditions slow down economic growth, and the boom phase starts to transition into a bust phase. Now, during the bust phase, the economy experiences a slowdown or a recession. Reduced spending, business investments, and economic activity, they lead to job losses and decreased consumer confidence. As a result, the economy contracts and businesses, they might start to struggle, ultimately causing bankruptcies and financial distress, sometimes even a full-blown recession. Now, to combat the recession and stimulate economic growth, the Fed may then lower interest rates yet again. Now, the move aims to encourage borrowing and spending, rekindling economic activity, and starting a new boom phase again. The cycle of lowering and raising interest rates by the Fed, it can create a self-reinforcing loop of boom and bust periods. When interest rates are low, businesses and individuals may be more inclined to take on riskier investments and excessive debt, contributing to speculative bubbles in asset values, asset markets like the real estate market, or maybe even stocks. Heck, even the bond market for that matter. And these bubbles, they can lead to unsustainable growth, which would be followed by a very sharp correction, maybe even a crash, resulting in a bust phase. So you get it, guys. Now, predicting the optimal timing and magnitude of interest rate adjustments is very complex, and there is a risk of overstimulating or overheating the economy during a boom or tightening credit conditions too much during a bust, making the economic downturn even worse. I think most of us have seen that in our lives here in America. But if this is what's happening with the Fed, why doesn't the Fed just stay their butts out of it, not mess with interest rates, and let the economy do its thing naturally? Oh well. But right now, we're in the middle of a deflationary, deleveraging period, and things might get a little bit tougher economically. What the central banks decide to do will determine if this ends up as inflationary or deflationary outcome. How long and how bad this phase lasts really depends on things like government solvency and how productive the economy can be. Now, there are some potential factors that could help, like advances in technology, more people in the population, maybe a millennial baby boom, cool things with artificial intelligence, better energy sources, and, maybe even going back to actually having some sound money practices. At the individual level, it's all about diversifying your wealth and making sure that you don't have all your investment eggs in one basket. Investing in assets like gold, silver, platinum, and Bitcoin, it's all about embracing financial sovereignty and also making informed choices. Now, of course, a lot of this depends on your personal financial appetite and your own personal financial situation. You just got to do your homework and you got to do what's right for you. I mean, there is a reason that this is not taught to us in school. The higher ups, they don't really want us to wise up and gain financial literacy, because that would mean us escaping the rat race and actually becoming financially free. And then they wouldn't have the slaves that they have every day in the workforce, killing themselves every single day just to get a little bit of a paycheck. Let me just go ahead and break it down a little bit more here. So while society wants you to be financially stupid, you will always be dependent on your boss employer. It's very easy to convince you to buy things you don't need. You're giving society more money because you don't know how to keep it. I just need to say this. If you don't know how to create your own side hustle, your own side income, or save some money, you will always be at the mercy of your boss or your employer. And that means you have to live by their rules, their conditions, because, well, You need their money to survive. It's not the most freeing situation, you know what I mean? So what can you really do in this situation? Saying no to your manager might get you replaced or even fired, but you need that paycheck, so you end up saying yes. And if you don't know how to budget your money, it's very easy for corporations to convince you to buy things that you don't really need. They show you all these nice things, and if you're spending recklessly, might as well make them richer, right? But it's not you who benefits. Then there may be the shiny car that you've been desiring, right? The dealership is like, hey, we like you, so you can put down only 10% of that luxurious $50,000 car, and then you can pay it back over 10 years with just a little bit more interest. Nothing too crazy. Now, of course, it sounds appealing, but here's the thing, guys. That little more, that little extra interest definitely adds up over time, and the dealers end up making a lot more money than you think, especially knowing that the dealerships make a lot of their money, if not most of their profits, from the financing department. You could have saved those extra thousands of dollars instead of letting them just kind of slip into the dealer's pockets. Some people confuse this kind of spending as an investment, but it is not an investment. An investment is putting money behind something that is expected to be profitable or that will provide future benefits. Paying back a loan doesn't count as an investment. It's just fixing you into a hole that you dug for yourself. There's budgeting, a crucial skill that can make a huge difference in your financial journey. When you know how to manage your money wisely, you're less likely to fall for unnecessary spending traps. Corporations and marketers, they thrive on convincing you to buy things you don't really need. But when you have a solid budget in place, you can resist the temptation and actually focus on what truly matters to you. And let's talk about how people justify their materialistic purchases by saying that they're contributing to the economy. It's true, our economy thrives on all of these different purchases, but it doesn't mean that you have to go overboard. Many workers live paycheck to paycheck because they just don't invest in their own future. But guess what, guys? Schools, they don't really teach us about money because it's not in their best interest to do so. So it's up to you to educate yourself on personal finance and to make smarter money decisions. You gotta break free from the cycle of consumerism and financial dependence. Read some personal finance books, educate yourself, and take control of your financial future. Pick up some personal finance books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or Why Didn't They Teach Me This in School? 99 personal money management tips to live by. That way, you won't be fully dependent on corporations or bosses, and you could pave your own way to financial freedom.